I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Derrek Schrader.
I'm Taylor Cunningham.
I'm Atticus Dennis.
I'm Josh Roiland.
And I'm Emily McNair, and we're broadcasting live from the Great Concavity.
I'm Alex Abrahams, and I think you mean the Great Convexity.
Love it.
She's right. She's right. I agree, Alex.
Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody to episode 14 of The Great Concavity. This is a very exciting episode for us because, as you can tell, we have a multitude of guests this time. So thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Josh Roiland, you are a friend of Matt's and myself. I met you at the conference last year, and we hung out a lot in the bar, especially on the last night, and you had your special sauce under the table.
Yep.
That was...
We brought a bunch of booze down from the hotel room and drank it in the hotel bar and saved a lot of money.
Yeah, we saved a lot of money. Like we also bought drinks there too, so it wasn't like a totally shisty operation.
We bought one drink,
one a drink,
and just nursed it under the table all night long.
Totally.
But this is the first time we've actually had guests on live from the concavity. So Dave is in Canada, but on the wrong side of Canada.
Right.
So really, we haven't actually spoken to someone who might know a feral hamster or a giant infant.
Yeah, Japanese lobster.
Like but you know what Dave was hinting at, the reason why we're having you guys on is that you are special students in a way, not like special, but special.
Exceptional.
In a way that is... I really think that in the history of university studies in the United States, there has never been a class like the one that you have taken or are still taking, about to finish. Mm-hmm. And that's why we want to have you on. There's been other classes about Infinite Jest or David Foster Wallace, but not one that has been so thorough and devoted and as completist as yours. So we kind of wanted to have you on as like a test study. Like you're kind of.
I think another. I mean, you could ask everybody else, but another word would be insane in terms of the amount that's on the syllabus. But
yeah. Okay, so Josh, you guys are at the University of Maine. Josh, you have a master's, you have a doctorate. Your major interest in Wallace is kind of journalistic. Would you say that's kind of your angle?
Yeah, it has been
for the most part.
Yeah, and so. The interest has always been in journalism. I started writing about the journalism just as, after his death, as a sort of way to sort of like process the death and all that kind of stuff. And then I realized, oh wait, there's a whole scholarly possibility here to keep to kind of mine that field. Yeah. And it's also like nobody else really does it. Ryan does it. Ryan Marnane at Salve Regina. But there's not a lot of other people, and so like in academia, that's what they tell you is like find something that other people haven't done and do that. Right. And so it's been a nice place to do some research and now it's been fun to kind of take that into the classroom too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have a few publications on Wallace that we've seen in book form. Lee Constantino's book, for example.
Yep, there's that. There was. So that appeared in Literary Journalism Studies, a journal first, and then through kind of a weird rando story, ended up in Sam and Lee's book. I sent him an email at like 1 a.m. after a handful of beers, and I saw a post on the Howling Fantods. Nick had posted that Lee and Sam were doing this book. So I wrote and said, "Hey, do you want to include my essay?" And they said, "Well, let's see." And Lee wrote back and said, "Sure." And so that was cool. Yeah, and then there's a couple other ones, a couple in peer reviewed, and a couple popular ones as well that aren't peer reviewed journals.
Cool.
So yeah,
that's great.
So we have 5 students with us. Is that correct? 5 students. And did you have any other students who started out in this class and dropped out?
No.
Wow.
I think, everybody was here from.
Everyone hung in.
Yeah, I was a little bit worried. I don't know if you saw, Emily had tweeted this earlier today. I was a little bit worried about. I sent everybody an email about a week or two before the class started.
Oh yeah. This is good.
Let me get that.
I sent an email out letting people, like, kind of saying hi to people. So I've had a class with Emily, Alex, and Taylor before, and this is the first time with Derrek and Atticus. so I sent an email out to people, and it said,
Do you want me to start from the beginning?
Yeah.
It says, welcome to your Honors 318 tutorial. Consider David Foster Wallace. I'll dispense with the usual beginning of the semester bromedes and just say plainly, without irony or hyperbole, this class will change your life. That was the opening paragraph of that email.
Okay, so like a pretty high bar has been set there.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. So now, having come through the class, would you guys say that was an accurate assessment?
I would say yes. And I don't know if it was, it might, sorry, Josh, it might be more of the literature and the actual, readings that we did, but just being able to, gather in a place and get to read this stuff for, a reason and for a sort of an end game was kind of really what it was.
Yeah. And for credit, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yep. That's awesome. So part of the life-changing nature of this course was Josh's amazing pedagogical skills.
No, not at all. It's all the work.
But then also the literature. So why don't you guys tell us a little bit about what you read in this course? Josh, you posted the syllabus, I think, on Twitter some months ago, and I read through it, and I was like, my jaw was on the table because I was like, how are they going to read all this stuff? This is insane. Not only did you read Infinite Jest, but you guys read dozens and dozens of other pieces, and then secondary criticism and the biography. So maybe walk us through kind of the method to the madness of the syllabus, and then let's hear from you guys, the students, about what stuff stood out to you and stuff like that.
So the idea, I'm just digging for my syllabus now. If one of you guys has the syllabus, the idea was just to cover as much as possible.
Yeah.
As much as possible within sort of limits.
Yeah.
I think I sent a version out, Matt. Did I include you in the early version? I was down in Austin actually in the archive in January, and I sent a copy to Matt and a copy to Sam Cohen, just saying, "What do you guys think?" And they were both like, "You're nuts." It was important, It was important that we did Infinite Jest, obviously, and it was important that we did other short stories. But I really wanted to cover the nonfiction as well. Mm-hmm. And then the question was how to organize it, and so we actually organized it thematically. And then the other big question was how to deal and account for the suicide. Do you start with that? Do you end with it? So, and go kind of chronologically and sort of end there. And I just felt, and I'd like to hear what everybody else thinks from the class. I thought it was best to deal with it right away. So the title of the first week is called "Death Is Not the End," and we read the Lipsky obit, and we read several pieces from the memorial service in New York. With Wallace's sister and Franzen and DeLillo, and then the A.O. Scott Best Mind of His Generation, and then the first 50 pages of the Max obit, or the Max bio, and just kind of talked about okay, let's deal with this and talk about it, but let's understand that we're not going to be reading the fiction or necessarily the nonfiction as autobiographical, right. and so let's talk about it right away, and let's talk about clinical depression, and let's get the bio out of the way so that we can free up some space to talk about the literature. I don't know, what did you guys think about that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that in one of the prompts that you guys sent us, you said something about what one of the biggest controversies in our class was, and I think one of them was definitely how to reconcile his death with his writing, and how to figure out but if he's writing all this crazy stuff about how great life is, or how to be conscious and to really separate yourself, how can we reconcile that with the fact that he ended up killing himself? And I don't know, that was one of the things that we were really trying to not necessarily argue about, but it was controversial. Yeah. And there are plenty of good arguments presented, but I don't know if it's ever going to be really possible to really come up with a real conclusion to that argument. But anyway, yeah, that's that. In regards to his death and reconciling that, that's what we kind of figured out.
Yeah. It's odd because to say that his ideas are invalidated by his suicide is seems like an ad hominem kind of approach, right? Rather than just judging the ideas based on their own merit. So, I mean, that is an interesting question that comes up.
But there's also, I think, then the issue of Wallace persona and the afterlife of Wallace.
Yeah.
And so that was also, I think we wanted to talk about that a little bit as well. I don't know, what do the rest of you think about starting it that way? Taylor, were you gonna?
Yeah, I thought that was a good approach because it was a way of being really upfront about the suicide right away instead of, I think saving it for last would have been kind of strange, actually, because we're all aware of it, and not talking about it until the end would have been almost like kind of hiding something.
The lobster in the room.
Yeah. I mean, we'd all be sort of talking around it, and so having that out in the open, I think, actually deepened the conversations. So I think it was good that we did it that way.
Good, cool.
You know what strikes me as weird is that you would probably not do that for any other writer. Like, there's a lot of other writers who committed suicide. I mean, Hemingway, Virginia Woolf, Hunter S. Thompson. But I can't imagine, starting out a class and teaching Hemingway by saying, let's talk about his suicide. It just, it's so much a part of Wallace's current persona that, we are still so close to it. I don't know if that's ever going to change. I don't know. It's something, it's the only question I really sent to you guys is, how do you sort of reconcile those two? Is it even possible to separate out the life and the work? Because back in the old days, that was something that was very much in vogue. It's really not anymore.
Right.
That, to say, oh, you can't really separate out this, new criticism. But it used to be, is there any value in just saying, oh, let's not talk about it? It's I don't know, because it's hard for me. I think a lot of the appeal of Wallace is his biography because it has this very clear arc,
Sure. Well, sure. And I think also, a part of that comes from the subject matter of the fiction too. So, I mean, suicide is a theme, so it's a theme in the fiction. It's prevalent in the nonfiction. It comes up in the commencement address. So,
and the depressed person. I mean, a lot of his stories, in retrospect, I got to say, we didn't know at the time. It didn't even occur to me that he was a depressive. Yeah. It sounds crazy at the time, but in reading him in the late 90s, I was just man, this guy really writes well about alcoholism and depression. But he totally denied it in public, which he's supposed to, but literally, he didn't talk about it, so people didn't really know the extent of his biography.
Yeah, when we constructed the syllabus, and so, kind of working our way through that sort of thematically. And so the second week of the semester, the theme was called Everything and More for that week. So each of the weeks is named after some sort of element of his work. And so so that week we talked about consciousness. And so it was, we looked at the Kenyon speech, and we looked at the Cassette of the Lobster and Federer and Forever Overhead and the language essay. And the Charlie Rose interview, the idea of let's think about consciousness. But then the week after that is called, the theme was eliminating the map. And so it was this idea, I wanted to sort of juxtapose the idea of sort of good consciousness. What does Wallace say? He said there's good consciousness and there's rape by psychic Bedouins, bad consciousness. And so that was kind of the idea of kind of juxtaposing those two, and so in the eliminating the map week we do the depressed person, good old neon, suicide as a sort of present, supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, and then Maria's piece inside the David Foster Wallace self-help library, and then some more of the bio. I don't know, Alex and Emily, Derrek, what do you guys think about sort of moving along that way?
Well, I think it was one of the things we did with this class as well is we went and sat in a lecture that Josh was giving, and he was kind of presenting some the first or second year honors students, and they were kind of given this weekly assignment to read through as much Wallace as they could, and then we at the end of this presentation we did a question and answer sort of segment, and someone asked that question to us and said, how can you read his stories and not think it's about him? And kind of the answer that we came to was, having that consciousness and having that awareness of who he was as a person and where he's coming from as an author, and kind of the experiences he has to kind of, they say authors write what they know. So you need to be aware of that when you're reading his stuff. But I think that we all agreed that it'd be doing a disservice if you could just write off his work as biographical, and you have to kind of approach the written stuff that he has there as something more than just a recount of his life and his life experiences. So you'd really be doing Wallace a disservice if that's all you kind of consider when you're reading his stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Can I ask you, Alex, had you read any Wallace before, or were you aware of him before this class?
I took a literary journalism class with Josh, and so we read, we read the Federer piece, we read Consider the Lobster, so that had kind of been my only exposure. So going into this, I only knew about his journalism going into this class.
But you liked it, or you were intrigued?
Yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah. And can I ask a follow-up question there? What's your impression now? Like, do you consider yourself a fan? Do you try to get other people to read it? Or do you consider yourself like, I'm done, I've read too much?
I think I'm annoying now as a person because...
Yeah, me too.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
I don't think you're annoying, Alex. I think I'm
thank
annoying.
you.
Is what I mean by that.
I find that now I'll have conversations, I'm calling my mom back home and I completely, reroute the conversation to talk about something I read, or you should really look at this story. I think you'd really connect with it, and then she'll be kind of get offended. Why do you say I would connect with a depressed person? I'm like, just read it, you'll understand. But yeah, no, I think and half of my Twitter feed now is kind of like back and forth conversations about Infinite Jest jokes.
Yeah. Alex and Emily and I have a sort of like running back and forth, especially when we're like, as we were kind of coming to the end of Infinite Jest. It just was sort of so pervasive. When we were, I was. What's the name of the character at the end of Infinite Jest? The drug addict that Gately's with.
Gene Fackelman. Faxter.
Yeah. So whenever Emily would tweet something, I'd respond with, "That's a goddamn lie."
That's a goddamn lie.
For no reason.
For no
just
reason.
harass me with Infinite Jest quotes.
Yeah. So.
Do you want to throw your Twitter handles out there? You want to throw it out there?
Oh yeah, people can follow along in real time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So my Twitter handle is besides X space. And my name is Salacious B. Crumb, which is a Star Wars reference, so it's not my actual name.
It's Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Oh, sweet.
Alex,
that one went over my head.
Yeah, mine is at XELA Abrahams. It's just Alex backwards. Cause,
I was always wondered what the hell
yeah,
that was.
because apparently Alex Abrahams is a popular name, which I wasn't aware of until I tried to make a Twitter account. But yeah, so I just did Alex backwards and then Abrahams, and I think my name right now is 9.
Yeah, what the hell is that about?
It's my jersey number, my soccer number. It's not really that deep, but yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I just changed my name on Twitter.
That's cool.
Mine is just at Josh Roiland.
Same here. I'm totally uncreative.
And
what about Atticus or Derrek? Or Taylor?
Derrek and Atticus and Taylor. Are you guys going to hop on Twitter anytime soon? And
No.
Probably not. Social media is not my thing.
But it's really interesting, sort of like how the Wallace world.
It's all on.
It's
Twitter,
all on
man.
Twitter, and it's. I think it's also interesting how small the world is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like I found myself having to. Like, there are a few prominent scholars who are not on Twitter, and I've sort of been like, "What's your problem, man? Why don't you want to be part of the community?" You know, and and that's I got to restrain myself because I'm like, I get it. Not everyone is built for Twitter or social media, but it's amazing how much of it has transferred over from real life into like this social world online, whether through our listserv or through Twitter and Facebook. And I have a post about this coming up on Infinite Winter on Monday, so I don't want to rehash things that probably people are going to read next week. But I'm big about this sense of community because I think after you read Infinite Jest, especially, there's an instinctive thing to want to go and talk to someone about it, or ask someone like I didn't read it in a class like you guys, so I read it and I was just like, oh my God, I got to find someone else who'll read this 1,000-page book with me.
Help me try and figure
really
some of this stuff out.
Yeah, it was really hard to find someone who's like, yeah, okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, finding people online was huge.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think for us, I mean, I don't, for me, that was kind of when the class really, I mean, there's only 6 of us total, and we meet in my office.
Right.
And so, but this is actually the 3rd classroom that we tried out to try to just to
get comfortable.
Well, yeah, to try to just get a different sort of to be comfortable and have a good vibe. But I think it was, and maybe Derrek and Taylor and Atticus, I don't know what you think, but in terms of reading Infinite Jest is, I think, when things really came together in the class. Like coming into, moving into the office and talking about Infinite Jest, and it was like all of a sudden we're like, oh shit, this is now we kind of hit our stride, and that's when we started having the supplemental classes. And all
Yeah,
those.
tell us about that.
Oh yeah. Well, the supplemental classes is just that there's too damn much on the syllabus, and so even though we meet, I know I've said this in emails to you guys, but we meet every Thursday for 2.5 hours, and they're troopers. We don't take breaks or anything, and oftentimes we go 3 to 3.5 hours.
Wow.
And but even then, we still don't get through the. We still don't get there. It's funny. I teach a grad class later in the evening, and they're always like, "Can we have a longer break? Can we get out early?" And I'm like, "You should. You guys are in grad school. That yeah. Anyway. And so I'm always kind of telling them that the Wallace class does a lot more work than they do. They're also great too. So if any of them listen, they also do a great job. But but we couldn't get enough. We couldn't talk about it in all in the 2.5 to 3 hours. So then I started proposing that we just randomly meet on Monday afternoons once in a while as a quote supplemental class, and that happened once, and then it didn't happen for a couple weeks, but then during Infinite Jest it happened about 3 or 4 weeks in a row, and I'm not sure who was it, you Alex, that said, or Taylor, like you can't call it a supplemental class if we have it every single week, it's not supplemental.
It's compulsory.
So, yeah, exactly. So, but what did you guys think in terms of reading Infinite Jest and thinking about that in terms of community and maybe kind of moving into the office, or how did the different spaces affect the way the class ran?
I think for me personally, like coming into the office where there's like a couch and it's kind of more laid back, I felt
in 1,000 degrees
and way hotter than any other room. I just felt more confident in speaking, I guess, especially in this classroom. I felt like I could just kind of say whatever I wanted. It was more relaxed for me, so I didn't feel that pressure to like come up with the next great idea or whatever. I just kind of was like, I'm just going to ramble and see where it takes me, and that's okay. And so I think that definitely helped me, especially with this book, because there's a lot of things. I think for me, I ramble in order to get somewhere when I talk a lot. So
your verbal processor.
With this book, it helped me. Yeah, it helped me just to like verbally process the whole thing, I guess, and to talk with everyone about it and see everyone's takes on the same scene that we all read. It was really interesting to experience.
So the office really allowed you to like let your inner infant out. Is what you're saying.
Definitely.
Yeah.
My inner hamster.
Was there anyone who ended up not liking Infinite Jest, or did everyone sort of really get into it, or what?
One person disliked the ending a little bit.
Yeah. I feel like I'm gonna have to come up with a
Who
real
was that?
argument.
That's fair. Was that Taylor?
Yeah.
Yes, we're all kind of looking at Taylor right now.
Oh,
Sorry,
well,
Taylor.
it's not that I disliked it. I guess maybe I was just sort of critical of it because it felt kind of like an Infinite Jest, really, and that was irritating to me, only because we'd done so much work. We read a 1,000-page book and all of the end notes, and then there's no ending, really, and you kind of find it in the beginning again, but even then it's still circular. So I guess in some ways, when you're looking for that reconciliation, it can be a little bit irritating at the end of a very, very long, complicated book. So
yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question there? What is your take on the graveyard scene? What is your take of what's going on there?
Oh my goodness.
You don't have to answer it for everyone, because like everyone has this question, but I'm just curious if you have like what when you first read it or after it, did it make any more sense to you, or did you have more questions, or what?
I think I was still just as confused. I mean, the only thing that really changed was that it sort of like shifted, like the focus shifted, where it wasn't just sort of a scene in the margins, like a passing scene, and more became more central. Is the one thing that I noticed, but I think I'd have to read the entire book again to figure that scene out.
Totally.
Because it's
Welcome to the club.
Confusing.
We got a book club for you.
Yeah.
You should join. I'm sure we'll do it again in 2017.
Matt,
Infinite Spring or something.
Matt, do you mean like just like, is it real? Like, is the scene, is the graveyard scene real?
No, just like just summarize it for me. Like, what's happening? Why is John Wayne there? Why is Hal there? Why is Gately there? Why are they digging up to Head?
Well, it's funny because over the weekend, Emily found that Aaron Schwartz
theory.
And that I don't know, kind of blew my mind a little bit. I don't know about the rest of you. Atticus, you read that one, but you've read a lot of other ones too. So what do you think of the Aaron Schwartz one?
What I was talking about with these guys is that reading the different explanations of what happened at the end of the book or the beginning of the book necessarily, there's plenty of evidence for plenty of different explanations, and like for instance, like how Hal ends up like changing and why he seems to have no clue what he's talking about, like whether it was DMZ or like whether the fungus that he ate was like fermenting in his system or something since the beginning of the book or since he was little.
Totally.
Yeah, exactly. So what's going on in the scene? I had no idea before I read some of the conclusions, but other than that, it just seems like, they're digging up himself's head to find the master copy. Gately and everybody else is there because they're getting pressured by the AFR and they need to get there before the AFR gets there. And I don't know. That's basically what I got out of it.
Anyone else? Theories? Emily? You were just like on Twitter, like, holy shit, this is something else.
Yeah, well, and it's not something that I'm gonna be like, this is exactly what happened, but it's just like one interpretation or one sort of reasoning, which I think was the best part about this class was the discussions and reading this like huge, just life, overtaking and life altering novel and being able to hear what everyone thinks of it and how everyone's interpreting it. So, I mean, even now as like, it's actually funny. I was like procrastinating doing other work by looking up like Infinite Jest theories, and I do that now. I'm like, I wonder like what people think about this. So, and I like get lost in like
I'm doing the same thing right now.
I've been doing that for like 20 years. So.
I get lost in like the Infinite Summer like forums and stuff. I'm just like pages and pages of reading everyone's ideas, and I don't have like a solidified sort of interpretation or idea of certain scenes in the novel, but it's nice to just see and hear what other people think about it, and so that's the best part about the community, I think, is that it's
totally. So going back to this question, I just got a text from my wife yesterday. She flew to New York to meet a friend to hang out. She said, I literally finished the last page of Infinite Jest on the plane when we landed, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. Emoticon, celebratory stuff. And she's like, yeah, and now I have to process the ending. And I was like, lol, like the tide was way out and Gately on the freezing sand. She's like, yeah, like, is there a chapter missing? And I was like, no way, Jose. She's like, I know, but the storylines were converging and then they just didn't. And so like, she's just as confused as anyone, about what do you make of this, right?
Taylor's gesturing wildly over here.
Oh, well, I didn't have a comment. I was just saying, you're sort of waiting for all of these things to come together because you have to follow, I don't know how many different narrative threads, and none of them seem to come together at the end, and except for that graveyard scene. But then you're not really told why they're all standing there with each other. So,
well, the title of the book, you can't have Infinite Jest without the skull, right? And the point that I wanted to make is that you're right in that Wallace had to balance out this sort of being hostile to the reader about saying, you read a 1,000-page book, now here's a middle finger, and you figure it out. What he ends up doing, I'm saying either consciously or not, what he ends up doing is bringing us together to talk about it. And in a way that I think other writers, either modern or postmodern, post-Joyce, kind of did and kind of didn't, and that's sort of the successful thing is like, you can't really write a book hoping academia will study it, right? And that's not your audience. Your audience is this reader who is emotionally invested in the book. But yet that's the thing that ended up creating the Wallace community like 20 years ago was people seeking out other people to talk to about like, wow, I'm so invested in this.
Yeah, it's so interesting, like the idea of a Wallace community. So two things. So we tried to sort of like prep for kind of the weird, uncertainty or unfinishedness of the endless loop of the novel. The week before we started the long thing, which occupies seven of our weeks. The theme for week 4 is called Greatly Exaggerated, and we talk about Wallace and postmodernism and Wallace's views on sort of what postmodern literature is and should do. And so, we read the McCaffrey interview, we read E Unibus Plurum, we read some of the some of his short stories as sort of primers for kind of having all these odd narratives. We do little expressionless animals, my appearance, one of the brief interviews. We do some stuff out of the conversations with David Foster Wallace. Just as a sort of, because Wallace is talking about, in our real, our daily lives, stories don't always have endings. People come and go. Things are all that kind of stuff. And so, as a sort of as a prime, I'm not sure to the degree which, by the time you're on page 500, I'm not sure you're thinking about the McCaffrey interview or not. But but in terms of thinking about the Wallace community, and something I think that Emily said, is that none of us, I think we all at different, we felt embarrassed to read the book out in public.
Yeah, totally.
Which is common. I think, especially, and that gets to a whole other conversation about, there was that the New York Magazine piece, was it last year, or a couple of them actually, about sort of David Foster Wallace as a literary bro and all that kind of stuff, as Matt's giving the camera the
H, whenever the H word comes out in relation to Wallace, you just oh, here we go again, the
No, but that's a good question, and maybe it's a question for Derrek or Atticus about, were you aware that, now you're, a cliche, a dude talking about Dave Foster Wallace, and, there's this pressure not to be, a douchebag about it?
I don't know if there's supposed to be a pressure, but I'm not aware of it, and I'm not really under any stress, so I don't know how Derrek's feeling, but here we go.
No, same. I didn't know that was a thing, so I guess it's good that I didn't know that.
That's awesome.
That's glorious.
No, it's awesome.
Keep yourselves pure,
it's
guys.
Awesome, but and it was really not a thing 20 years ago, but it is. It is something Josh, do you feel it? You have to deal with this?
Yeah, there's a weird thing of in academia or on in the sort of academic Twitter, it's oh, what do you do and what do you do? And so Wallace has always kind of been a side thing for me, but it's oh, I work on David Foster Wallace, and then there's a sort of an eye roll that comes with that a little bit, it's not significant or substantial.
Hugh Steepley shows up and he's oh, here we go again.
Yeah, and so
one of these guys.
And so there's a weird sort of. It's not embarrassment or anything like that, but it's you feel the need to justify what you do in a way that if I, was doing DeLillo, yeah, it's not there. But I know Emily and Alex, you guys were we talked about kind of not wanting to read the book in public. Why did you not want to read the book in public?
Well, I think one reason that I didn't want to read it in public is because I found myself constantly having to justify what I was doing, kind of. And I found sometimes people would kind of come at me and say, oh, you're blowing this out of the water, you're making such a big deal out of this, you need to get over yourself. And I'm no, he did this, and he did this, and he did this, and he's this is connected to this, and this is 1,000 pages, and it was just kind of my competitive side came out almost, and I had to prove them wrong, that they didn't know what they were talking about, but... yeah, I don't know. I don't think
that's funny. So, are these people who are kind of well, Wallace isn't part of the American literary canon yet? It's too early to fit him in, and so you have to justify it from that perspective, or is that sort of what you mean?
These are people that don't read a lot of books.
To be fair, Alex got accosted yesterday walking across campus carrying a bag of chips.
Yeah. Yeah, so...
By birds?
No, not by birds, but by people who don't read books.
Some bro saw her with the chips. She was bringing the chips to our last day of Wallace class. And what did they say to you?
They're you got enough chips there?
She had one bag of chips.
Wow. Were these corporate snacks or what?
Yeah. Emily, why didn't you want to read it?
Well, this is actually funny because the other day I was looking at a job application for I don't know, it was a book intern or something. Oh no, I'm desperate. Anyway, so in the application it was send us a cover letter, and in the cover letter say the last book that you read, and the last book that I read was Infinite Jest, and I was if I put that, they're gonna think that I'm some pretentious asshole, or or they're not even gonna believe that I read it, and I'm just gonna be one of those people that it's yeah, I read Infinite Jest, but like bought it and then sat on my shelf for 5 years or whatever. But I don't know. I feel like there's just, because it's so dense, it's not a book that people just like pick up for fun. And, so it kind of carries that weight where it's like, oh, I'm reading this to prove something or, to make myself into something that I'm not. So I guess that was kind of, I don't know, the fear or like the stigma surrounding the book. At least that's what I thought.
Yeah, that's funny. Did you guys hear the Jason Segel comment about when he rocked up and bought Infinite Jest at the bookstore to kind of like start preparing for his role in the end of the tour? The girl at the counter was like, "Oh yeah, like every guy I've ever slept with has an unread copy of this on his shelf," which goes to your point there of like, it's kind of, it can be used as this thing to make yourself look intelligent, but that's, if you haven't actually put the work in, it's disingenuous.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the argument for the Molly Fisher piece, why literary chauvinists love David Foster Wallace, which irked me a little bit. And then there was an interesting response on LitHub by Jonathan Russell Clark. But then he said he had a really interesting line in here that I was just reading over today. A person can then glom onto Wallace's reputation without having to read a word of his writing, because, let's be real, anyone claiming to love David Foster Wallace who hasn't read Infinite Jest isn't really a literary type, are they? I know, of course, but then he says, I know, of course, that then there are those people who prefer Wallace's nonfiction, but those people would be the first to say that that in fact this has become its own hip assertion, which I thought was, I took personal offense to that comment.
Why couldn't he just rebut the literary chauvinism part and leave it at that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, so that was always something. So on top of kind of like doing Wallace studies, like doing Wallace nonfiction studies, always felt like kind of the stepchild in the Wallace studies. So it was like, well,
but I mean, it's widely acknowledged, like his nonfiction, is the gateway drug to Wallace. Like, if you want to get someone involved in Wallace, like, oh no, they never read him.
Supposedly
what do you give
thing.
them? Like, that's universally acknowledged.
It's acknowledged, but at least in academia, it's not followed up on. Look at the conference, the Wallace conference. The first 2 years. The first year there was 2 papers presented on nonfiction out of about 70 people. One was me, and one was a former student of mine that had Wallace at Case Western. And then last year there was me, and then there was Ryan.
Right.
And I mean, I feel like some of that is the nature of academia, right? Where you get people doing, there's much more established like American literature departments, and there's people who are going to do Wallace the way that they're going to do a paper on, Richard Powers or, Hemingway or Faulkner, and like they're just covering like, oh, we'll check Wallace off. They're not doing nonfiction at all.
Sure,
like, it's
and
a
it
smaller
also
genre
speaks
in
to
general,
sort of the marginalization of journalism in English departments. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's true. It's
not established.
My first 2 degrees are in English, and like doing journalistic studies, literary journalism. That's not, acknowledged as significant as doing fiction, and so.
It's probably not required at your current university to graduate with a degree in English. Do you have to take journalism or nonfiction?
I don't
think so. No. Yeah, no, it's mostly literature classes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Shakespeare, Chaucer. You have to
Alex
take
is
all
in a
of those,
Shakespeare
I'm sure.
class.
Yeah, I just had to perform a puppet show. I had to make sock puppets in my senior year of college, so that was cool. Yeah.
So like Mario.
Yeah.
That's great. So I'm getting the sense, maybe like, am I reading the room correctly, that this topic's been a bit of a hobby horse for Josh this term in the course, guys?
What do you guys think? Have I complained too much about or at all about nonfiction being marginalized?
I don't think so.
No.
I needed a larger audience before I could start pissing and moaning about the marginalization, which is fine for me. I don't care if people don't want to write about it. I'll keep writing about it. It just makes it easier. Makes my job easier.
It sure does. Yeah, that's good.
I guess cool. We were just talking the other day about like how he would always kind of sometimes exaggerate in some of his nonfiction.
Early nonfiction,
right?
Especially early nonfiction, I suppose, especially about like the fair piece. And we were what we were trying to figure out was, have you ever been to an event like the baton? He talks about like the baton twirling and like how people were like literally getting very injured from batons flying into the audience. And it's like, did this really happen? Like, did all this, it just, I know. Well, thank you. But anyway, it just seems like a lot of stuff works out way too perfectly for Wallace in his stories, and like stuff.
So it raises interesting questions about the reliability of the narrative.
So like, how can you? It's kind of difficult almost for me to, I don't want to say like distinguish his fiction from his nonfiction, but you can almost talk about his nonfiction kind of in the same sort of ish way that he talks about his fiction, because he still kind of tries to make points in his nonfiction that he tries to make in his fiction, if that makes any sense. So,
yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I like that.
If only somebody had written an elaborate philosophy of Wallace's orientation towards journalism as a fiction writer.
I'll have to Google that. So I want to go around the room another time and just ask you guys, you read a ton of stuff. Like, do you have a favorite of the stuff that you would read or that you have read so far? Do you have something that really stuck out to you as like the moment where you're like, yes, this is great?
This is when the click happened.
I guess for me, I would have to say Forever Overhead was my favorite piece that we read. I just remember I was sitting up, it was really late at night, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to read this like one last section, or like I was just going to read like the first sentence of it and see what it would be like about. And then I couldn't stop reading it until I finished it. And I was so intrigued with the amount of description that I was like reading and the amount of imagery that was coming into my head and how many symbols and just everything. Like, I thought it was just so overwhelmingly beautiful, and I just really actually couldn't put it down. That was like the first thing that I've ever read that I just couldn't stop reading until I finished it. So that really changed my perception of him. And it was like early on in our class too. So it really like made me appreciate him a lot more just by reading that one piece. So I don't know.
All right. So Taylor, what was your favorite piece? I'm not going to ask you to read it, but did you have a favorite piece in the class?
Yeah, actually Forever Overhead was mine as well. So, I guess what caught me in that piece was Wallace's emotional sensitivity to sort of scenes around him, the way he describes everything in such detail, and I think was sort of the beginning, or sort of the opening for me into sort of Wallace's talking about and exploring empathy. So for me, that piece I also thought was really beautiful, and that was my favorite as well.
Awesome.
And Taylor's a fiction writer, so that should just be noted as well in terms of her eye.
So that's saying something.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Atticus.
So I really liked a supposedly fun thing that I'll never do again, and I can kind of relate to the story because I went on a very not fun week-long cruise to, believe it or not, Bermuda this past summer, and long story short, I was in a very small cabin with my brother and my overweight grandfather, and it was just really bad. But
it was not even supposedly fun.
There were oh god, okay. It wasn't supposedly, well, it was supposed to be fun, but it wasn't. So, and I could just really relate to like the whole like tourists kind of walking around, getting away from already being away from it all, like all that sort of thing, like kind of just imposing themselves on the locals, I guess, and it just really took away from the whole experience that you're trying to get. And it's like, I don't know, it just really didn't seem natural. It just seemed way too much like consumerism, and I really hated it. So basically Wallace put my thoughts together for me when I read that piece, and it just completely clicked for me there. So I really, really enjoyed that.
Awesome.
And Atticus is a tennis player. But there's something that Atticus wants to say about tennis.
Please,
that was like his goal
do.
to get onto the podcast.
Okay, so I don't know if you remember in Infinite Jest, but one time he's talking, or the narrator is talking about Enfield Tennis Academy, and they're talking about how you're not a pro tennis player unless you pick up tennis balls with your racket. Like you kind of place the racket with the ball against your leg and kind of bring it up.
Oh yeah.
Now I don't consider myself to be bad at tennis, but I bend over to pick up tennis balls. So when I read that, I felt a little bit pissed off, and or like I described myself as like a tennis pleb, but yeah. So basically, and then I self-consciously next time I played tennis, I tried to like pick up a ball with my racket, and it really didn't work out. So I'm just gonna keep bending over and picking them up, I guess.
Man, I can totally relate to that. I think about that passage every time I play tennis, which is semi-regular. And I also tend to wear sunglasses when I play tennis. And then I recently came across that line on this read where it discourages that. You know, it's like only a certain kind
exactly. And I'm like
sunglasses on the court.
Oh well.
But it's so practical.
Yeah.
You look like a dork there.
No way, man. I got Ray-Bans. I got a headband. It's all about fashion out there, you know?
All right, so who are we up to? Emily, did you have a favorite piece in class?
Yes, I did. This was my favorite piece would definitely have to be Good Old Neon. And I think a lot of it was just because it really kind of made me stop and think about myself and like who I think I am or who I try to present myself as. And it's the thing about Wallace that's so great, but also terrifying about a lot of his work is just that he makes you think about things that you probably would have never consider or even take the time to worry about. And it's terrifying because a lot of those things are like really existential questions or like, am I a fraud? Like, who am I? And, you know, so we talked about the sort of analysis paralysis of thinking like that. And, you know, I do every now and then I find myself getting into these sort of like in-bent spirals of thinking where it's like, you know, what am I, you know, everything I've ever thought has been thought or felt before. So am I really like a unique, authentic individual? But I've been able to sort of kind of stop myself, which I guess is something that Wallace was never really something that he could do. So I don't know, Good Old Neon was really just something that I could sort of identify with. And whether good or bad, I definitely think that was my favorite piece.
Cool.
No, it's one of his best stories for sure. All right, Alex?
Dun, dun, dun. I said it earlier, but the thing that kind of brought me to this class was I'm a journalism major, so I took literary journalism, and that was kind of exciting for me because it was cool to see that there's journalism that can actually be fun and interesting to read. Yeah. And not just kind of like 500 words of the facts. So that kind of brought me in here, but I found myself having my real life-changing experience that I was warned about when I was reading Good Old Neon or The Depressed Person. They're both kind of at odds with each other, but they both it was a terrifying experience for me to read them, I think, because I was like, oh my God, this is me. And these pressures that he's kind of bringing up in these stories, I'm putting these pressures on myself. So it was kind of like a therapeutic experience, I think, reading it.
I don't want to get us too far off track, but we could do a whole show just on who is the narrator of Good Old Neon and what is going on with the narration in that story, because I think, you know, it's one of his most technically complex one, but it's also like one of his most like emotionally raw stories as well. So it's really gratifying to hear two of you say like you really like that story, because I think it's one that I come back to a lot, because I think it's true for, you know, struggles in adulthood that people still have this feeling of like, you know, feeling like a fraud and struggling to be your authentic self. You know, that's something where, you know, you hear the term midlife crisis and people in their 40s deal with. So I think it's still very relevant story. I'm really glad to hear that. Dave, didn't you have a bunch of other questions you wanted to get into with these students here? Or?
Yeah. So this is kind of like the bonus round, like rapid fire. So we've heard your favorite pieces. How about least favorite piece? Sort of in like 1 or 2, 3 sentences each. What was the piece that was like, oh my gosh, I hate this?
Does anybody have one? Oh, Emily's got one right offhand. Emily, what's your least favorite?
This well, I grew to like it as we discussed it, but it was such just like a terrible experience to read, and that was Authority and American Usage. And I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, but it's just like it was so much, and how I just like kept flipping in it. I was like, this needs to end now. So that was,
long,
and that's
right?
just because I loved the discussion, and as we talked about it more, I was like, yes, it makes sense. I understand it now, but just getting through it was like, it was such a chore.
Bit of a slog. Yeah. But you came around. That's good. Cool.
Other folks? Things that you didn't care for as much? There's some real hesitations. I think that's significant.
That's a good sign.
Oh no, I failed.
I mean, I didn't have a least favorite piece, but I'm kind of... the usage piece. It was just kind of like we got to class early and we were out in the hall and we were kind of looking around. We're like, did you finish the whole thing? Like, I had to like rush through it this morning. It was really hard. So it wasn't horrible. I mean, I'm not jumping off the couch right now to say something I didn't like reading, but that was probably the biggest challenge this semester.
Right.
Well, I got to defend it a little bit in that I know several people who came to Wallace through that story. It appeared in Harper's in 2001, and my friend Mary was one of the editors on that story. And I think that for a certain type of person, that, including all the way up to like Brian Garner himself and Justice Scalia, like they were really drawn to these types of, grammar concerns and nerds. And there's a type of reader who's dying to read 50 more pages about dictionaries.
And so John Jeremiah Sullivan was also an editor on that piece.
Yeah, I mean, they brought in a huge team. It was one of the few times where Harper's, like every couple of years, does a separate insert into the magazine. And the first one of Wallace's was the cruise ship essay was like printed on separate paper and tipped into the middle of the magazine. And the same with the usage piece. If you look at the drafts, I'm sure you've looked at the drafts of it, Josh, in the Ransom Center. Like, these just marked to death. I mean, he spent like a year editing that piece. He went through just tons of.
Well, it was supposed to be in the Atlantic first, wasn't it? I think.
Right, and they wouldn't take it after a while.
Yep. Atticus, do you have something that you were gonna?
Well, like you just said, there are some people who would love to read like another 50 pages on there. And Wallace says, like right at the beginning, did you even know that the or that blah 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 has a seamy underbelly? Like, it's so true, and it's the same thing. Like in Consider the Lobster, where they would say, like everyone knows about lobsters, but it's all about like whether you want to find. I don't know exactly how I put it, but
all a matter of what your interests are.
All a matter of what your interests are, exactly. So like, and that has to do a lot with like, especially what Alex was talking about. Like these people like that are criticizing her aren't even readers. Like you have to have a certain interest if you're gonna enjoy what we've been reading, especially. And I loved certain parts of Authority in American Usage. I loved where he would talk about political correctness and how that's really not doing anyone any good, and that really struck me. But of course, other parts of Authority in American Usage, I was just like, yeah, kill me. The grammar war, prescriptivism versus descript. It's like, okay, more and more and more. I know, but for Wallace, for least favorite pieces, it's not that I have a least favorite piece, but I think in many of his pieces, there are some least favorite parts, I guess, where he starts kind of going off on these ramblings, and it's like him trying to make a point. It's like, yeah, I get it, but there you go. So,
yeah. Did the usage piece help you guys appreciate Avril in Candenza a bit more?
Yes, definitely.
That might be a nice connection point.
Yes, I think it. I mean, there's 6 of us total in the class, and there's this insane amount of reading. And I know Alex said like, oh, you had to rush through this reading in the morning, but like everybody did all the reading. Like it's something that you can tell as an instructor, like when you're teaching classes, you know, I mean, especially in a small class, we're all meeting in the damn office, like you're not going to bullshit your way through it. But I mean, that was pretty cool that people did all the reading. I mean, that says a lot about them, the commitment that they had to get the work done. So,
yeah, that's amazing.
Taylor, Derrek, do you guys have
job, guys.
Stories that are maybe not your favorite? No,
That's tough. I mean,
not really. They say.
I guess
You guys didn't have to read Fate, Time, and Language, did you?
Oh God,
That would be my least favorite.
That's his senior thesis.
oh,
Yeah.
so that's all philosophy.
Yeah, it's like
that's
it's a philosophy
that's
paper,
like,
yeah.
It's like analytical.
It's pretty brutal.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Did we have anyone else who wanted to comment on the toughest piece? Or did we get through everyone?
I'll say something real quick, that teaching Infinite Jest is hard.
Man, I bet. Oh my gosh.
Because it's like
Specifically how?
where to start, what to do. Like I think that the first class that we had was I thought good, because we just I just wrote all this shit on the board. Like sometimes I get going, I'll just fill up a board. I think you guys maybe saw it on Instagram, but then the 2 weeks after that, I just didn't know what the hell to do, because part of it was we just tried to we tried to just get a chronology of okay, what is going on, but that's boring, say, oh well, then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and so but I don't think we knew enough yet to kind of do it thematically or anything like that, and so so I really struggled maybe week 2, 3, and 4 to figure out what the approach was. But then something clicked where it was like we knew enough of the narrative where we were able to come in and just jump around. And so I'd be curious if other people have you guys ever taught it?
No. I've only taught a few pieces of Wallace to like English 11 students. So, like Consider the Lobster, the Kenyan Speech, the Norman Bombardini Stint-9 steak scene from Broom of the System. But I would never, that would never fly in a high school to teach Infinite Jest, or maybe like you could do like a couple scenes or something. But I can imagine it'd be like an absolute beast to try and teach that book. So congrats on getting through it, man.
Well, so
awesome.
what everybody did was one of the assignment, we didn't really have any writing assignments this semester. Just because the reading was so damn much, it was like, well, if you guys can come to class and do the reading, and we'll do the podcast at the end. But what they are doing is I shouldn't say there's no writing, because during Infinite Jest, they started creating a Google Doc full of all sorts of different stuff, which ended up being 80 pages single-spaced of information, which they're now a lot of it's Derrek. Derrek chronicled each and every character in the book and is writing little blurbs about each. But what they're doing is they can tell you more about it. But they're creating a website that'll be called Consider Infinite Jest. .wordpress.com. We'll see if we can find the $18 to get rid of the WordPress in the URL. But it's going to be a kind of a real user friendly website devoted to Infinite Jest. And I don't know, you guys want to talk about what's on the site, please?
There's a part about Canada.
There is a part called "What's the Deal with Canada?"
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I kind of took that one on.
Was that
yes,
Alex?
This is Alex.
Yeah,
I took that one on. I'm from the Toronto area, so some parts of this book I kind of took personally. Like, what the heck? What have we ever done to you?
I know, right? Like fucking youngsters all the time.
Just
you're like, are we that? Are we that bad?
A bunch of hosers just running amok. But yeah, so I kind of focus on that side of things. Trying not to make it. I'm trying to make it objective, not subjective. But yeah, so I kind of focus on that, and I'm just trying to work through James's filmography, which has been a task, because I don't really know what to do with it. Yeah. So it'll be a big reveal when I figure that out.
Emily, what are you doing? What are you adding to the site?
All throughout reading Infinite Jest, Atticus and I we were settled with doing plot. So our kind of thing right now is like, are we going to set this up, the way that the book sets it up, or are we going to try to do like a chronological timeline of how the years actually go? Because you do get that little part in Infinite Jest where he gives you all the subsidized years, and of course the book isn't linear. So, but I mean, we just did the plot like page by page basically, which was a chore, but loved it. Loved every minute of it. So that's like our big thing right now is people have this sort of the like reader's guide to reading Infinite Jest where you can read it chronologically, and that is out there. Like, people have put a lot of time into doing that. So ours is, we're trying to figure out if we want our website to be something you can look at while you're reading or something you come back to after you're done reading it.
Cool. Other additions, Atticus, Taylor, Derrek? Taylor, you're doing themes?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an easy one.
No, it was terrible. So I'm doing themes and motifs, and I kept a notebook with me when I was reading the book, like everyone else did, though. I just put down page numbers every time a word would come up or an idea that I thought had repeated itself. And it was just pages of page numbers that I'm still going back through. And it's really interesting, though, to see the way that the threads kind of, where things pop up throughout the book. It really helped me while I was reading it, too, do that.
What were some of the themes that you...
There are so many. Violence was a big one. There's identification, so
mirrors.
Empathy, mirrors were in there.
Waste,
wasting away, withdrawal, sentimentalism and irony. That's a big one in there. Yeah. So just a few.
Cool.
Taylor, has that affected your fiction writing at all? Because it seems like it's really hard to write that way, like write where you're writing like themes and motifs, right?
How has Wallace affected my fiction writing, or?
Yeah, I mean, or the themes and motifs in general.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine like trying to write in certain motifs or themes, or have you found yourself wanting to or wanting to avoid it?
What you told us.
Oh well, it's interesting because I was writing my thesis while I was reading Infinite Jest, and I was having a hard time kind of separating my own writing style, I felt, from Wallace's, because he's just so it's just hard. It's a full immersion when you're reading Wallace. So I'm going back over some of my thesis is half fiction, so I'm going back over some of the fiction, and I was talking to my fiction professor,
Who was?
Greg Howard.
And so Greg was a student of Wallace's at Illinois State.
Oh, okay.
And was his dog walker at one point as well. So, so it's cool now that he's a fiction professor here, and he's one of Taylor's professors. And you were talking to Greg about.
Oh, yeah. Well, I asked him because he asked me if I had any questions about the workshop and stuff. And I was like, well, my first question is, and I need to know this now. I need the hard truth. Like, do I sound like David Foster Wallace? And I don't really. But the great thing about Wallace, I think, is that he sort of allowed me to be more of my own self. I think he gives permission to people to sort of explore that more deeply. And I think that's what I took away from it mostly. Yeah.
Cool. Your approach talking about Infinite Jest and themes and recurring motifs and stuff, it sounds like you and Corey Baldoff would have a great conversation, because that's like very much her sort of approach to reading it too.
So Corey's the artist who has done all the color tabs throughout all the different. Is Corey on round 3 or
She's
4
on round
now?
3, yeah, and presumably done round 3, yeah.
3.
Yeah, and she was our guest on episode 4, in which she goes into more detail talking about her approach. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. That's awesome. I also want to ask you guys before we wrap up too, now that you've read all this Wallace, what is the next just novel that you're going to read for fun after doing this course? Are you going to go read something else by Wallace, or do you have like totally different plans?
I haven't had much time to really think about it yet, but I would really like to start reading The Pale King at some point, maybe over the summer or something.
Right away. Yeah.
And I'd really like to see how the characters are different or similar from Infinite Jest, and just see how he's improved.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah,
cool. I finished Infinite Jest again a few days ago, and I just started rereading The Pale King yesterday because I read it when it first came out, and I haven't gone back to it much since. So I got to refresh on it. But maybe we can do like a reading group, and we can meet up, talk about it online.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Cool.
I'm going to, I think, step away from Wallace for a little bit. I picked up Pulphead a couple of weeks ago, so I think I'll be reading some nonfiction and not fiction for a while.
Cool.
So Wallace has a lot of other essays and stuff that, since I've already bought some of his books, I want to get into some of his other essays that I really seem to enjoy. I've enjoyed all of his other stuff, so now I'm thinking like, hey, I'll go read his other essays and see what I think. Otherwise, in terms of like novels, my friend actually, he was reading Atlas Shrugged, and I really want to get into that, and I think that'd be a really fun thing to read.
All the big ones, hey?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not good.
Oh, come on.
But I read it when I was an undergraduate, so it's a rite of passage, I'll put it that way.
You're just hitting like all the encyclopedic novels.
Yes, definitely.
Get them all out of the way. That's good.
And, well, to be perfectly honest, I do want to read Infinite Jest again. I really miss it. I miss Mario. He was my favorite character.
Yeah, me too.
So I want to get back to that. But, I picked up recently The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. Actually, it was given to me as a gift,
cool.
So I'd like to read that.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to be picking up anything too serious anytime soon to read. I'm actually going on a little road trip.
Is it to the Ransom Center?
Yeah, I'm going to be going on a road trip soon
road
and
trip?
going across Canada, and then maybe coming back. Well, I am going to be making
Cool.
my way back across through the states.
Oh, nice.
So if I do happen to cross through Illinois when the conference is happening, maybe I'll stop.
Enjoy the prairies.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm going to try and drive through there as fast as I can, but I'm going to definitely be looking for maybe some audiobooks or a good podcast to check out while I'm driving across the country. But other than that, I don't really have any big reading plans in the near future.
Cool. That's awesome. How about you, Josh? What's next?
I'm on a Donald Hall binge. I'm on a Donald Hall binge right now. The former poet laureate of the United States.
Cool.
And he's from New Hampshire. And
He's
I've been
really
reading.
good. He's really good, man.
Yeah. I'm glad you like him, Matt. He's. I'm reading right now his book called "The Best Day, the Worst Day: Life with Jane Kenyon," about his life with his wife Jane Kenyon, the poet Jane Kenyon, who died of leukemia when she was 47. I started reading his book Essays After 80, which came out a couple years ago, and is maybe the most powerful book I've read in the last 10 years. And so, working through that and his book Life Work, I thought was really meaningful, talking about sort of what work writing is. And so I have a whole stack of Donald Hall that I'm going to try to work through.
Wow, cool. So we just heard that Mario was a favorite character. Any other favorite characters from the whole span of what you guys read that stood out to you?
Yeah, so I think that Pemulus is probably my favorite character. He's just a really, really clever guy. He has some very meaningful life advice for some of the students, and especially he really speaks to certain issues that students are having. Although he's kind of crazy and nutty at sometimes, kind of a goofball, he also really speaks to the human, and just kind of like David Foster Wallace does actually.
Awesome, love Pemulus.
Taylor, do you have a favorite character in the novel?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Mario as well, but I think one of my favorite characters is Joelle, just because she's one of the only complex female characters you get in the book, and just think that she's really compelling with the metaphor of the veil, and
you have and Taylor, you have a least favorite character as well, right?
I do. I really don't like Oren. He's kind of a misogynist.
Do you love how he ends up though in the very funny twist of fate, large green glass?
Yeah, that's probably my favorite scene. He had it coming.
Yeah, he's pretty low on the morality scale. He's kind of down there with Lenz almost.
Hey, no one's perfect, all right.
Yeah. I guess for me, I'd have to say that Avril was my favorite character because I thought she was written so interestingly throughout the novel, and how you never really see inside of her head. And she's very mysterious, kind of like Joelle, but in a different way. And I think that she has a really strong power over her children without actually doing anything. And I think that's a really trippy concept to try to wrap your head around. And I think she's really just a good character for me. So I don't know.
Yeah, like I said, I really love Mario. So Mario is definitely my favorite character. I don't really identify with him because I'm not such a sincere, authentic person. I'm a pretty sarcastic kind of individual, but he's just such a sincere character. Just looking throughout the novel, there's so many just shady, ironic, sort of parodic characters, and Mario's just so authentic and so real.
I definitely would have to say my favorite character is Gately. I kind of start, you start off hating him, and then you grow to love him, and then you start hating him again, and then you love him towards the end of the book. He's just one of those people. But the thing I like about him is he's just such a sensational character. He's a murderer, he's a thief, he has the toothbrush and ass tactic. So he's kind of got all those sensational things that you'd look for in a character.
That's accidental manslaughter. I don't know if that's the same as murder, but okay.
It's just a Canuck, right? Who cares? With
Well, and he gets charged with Nuckslaughter later at near the end of the end of the novel too. So
that's true, but I don't count the Canadians. So.
Yeah, they're hardly human.
I think for me, one of the characters that I found really the most compelling was himself. He's kind of seen as a mysterious, character early on that we don't hear a lot from. But then I think as the novel kind of wraps up, or at least winds down page wise, we find out that he was. That there was a lot more there than just him being kind of this weirdo, alcoholic, enigmatic film director. And so he was somebody. Yeah, he was somebody that I was really, really kind of drawn to. in addition to kind of all the violence that's in the novel, there's such all the scenes with Len's killing the animals, the way himself kills himself, the way Joelle's mom commits suicide. There's just so much violence.
Garbage disposals,
in the novel.
Man.
Yeah, it was a pretty gruesome scene, and the scene where Avril's dog dies, and getting his canine affairs in order, so it was pretty tough.
So, anyone have a final thought about this experience that you've had, like a kind of a huge takeaway, an interesting takeaway, or from you, Josh? Like, if you taught this course again, what might you do differently? Or
Yeah, definitely. So, when I first learned about Wallace through his Kenyan speech, and that really like touched me. I really could relate to it because through all like the consciousness, kind of getting outside of yourself and really considering the perspectives of other people before you consider this perspective of yourself. It's very easy, like Wallace says, to consider yourself as the center of the universe, and always everybody else has it out for you, and nobody else has any problems. Like all your problems are super important. Blah blah blah. That's basically what I got most out of it, and I really apply it to my daily life. It's almost like meditation, like really thinking, taking a step back, thinking about like how I'm living, how other people are living, and figuring out what. Yeah. So anyway, consciousness is really, really important to me, especially considering Wallace.
That's cool. So like that was like your starting point, the thing that hooked you about Wallace, and then having done this entire course and reading like a massive amount of what Wallace wrote, that's still your takeaway?
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. I like that.
For me, I think Wallace's work with empathy really touched me as a fiction writer. The way he's able to inhabit different people's lives and sees complexity in people. That's.
I guess for me, the big takeaway, I think a lot of his issues are really important, but I think the one that stands out for me the most is acceptance and like denial. I think he deals a lot with accepting who people are and who you are and what you're doing, and I think that's something that's really tough to deal with in a lot of situations, because acceptance implies that you're sort of opening up to people, and that's not the easiest thing to do all the time. And I think that Wallace himself had a lot of struggles with that, and I think it shows a lot in his works, and I think that makes him very relatable as a person and as like an author, and that makes his characters more relatable as well. So I would definitely say that acceptance and denial is like something really major.
For me, it would definitely be this idea of balance and sort of reconciliation between these extremes. Wallace in Infinite Jest a lot presents these sort of extreme situations, whether it's, extreme, just terrible violence, or extreme characters, or extremely sort of nice and sincere characters like Mario. So trying to find that sort of balance in life, and maybe even accepting the fact that sometimes there isn't a balance, and there isn't a way that you're going to be able to find a sort of center in between, kind of the craziness of everyday life and everyday scenarios. So, the balance of living consciously, but not so consciously that you're just paralyzed. So that was my biggest takeaway from Wallace, was balance.
For me, I think if I, teaching the class again, not to sound cheesy, but one of the first things that I would say is things that I would do differently. I would want to have these folks back. Like to have the six of us. It's to go through this whole thing was a pretty significant experience. It was a hell of a lot of work, and everybody did the work. And here it is, Friday, the last day of class at 7:00 now, where people are out at bars, and yet here we are sitting here talking about Wallace. And so that's pretty significant to me that they dedicated themselves this much to this work. From a teaching standpoint, I guess part of me wants to say I would take some stuff off the syllabus, but don't ask me what, because I want to keep everything on there. So maybe having more supplemental classes, building supplemental classes into the curriculum. I'm not sure I could get away with that, but figuring out some writing assignments, some different kind of engaging writing assignments, but being able to balance that with all of the reading. There's just way too damn much, and so it's figuring out how to do that without driving everybody crazy, I guess, would be the way that I would rethink the class in some ways.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think the thing that I took away from this class was definitely the kind of the relationships that were built in here, and just the environment of coming and meeting to this office, 3 hours once a week, and kind of creating these relationships with these people and working through all of this work that Wallace has for us. We're reading so much stuff about loneliness, and it somehow brought us together, which I think is an incredible thing for an author to do. When you're dealing with such dark stuff and you're dealing about working through issues on your own, and we're able to come together as a community and kind of work through these things, and you start developing these relationships with people. And
I'd imagine going through everything you guys have gone through together, you probably know each other pretty well.
Yeah.
At this point, the kinds of themes and topics that you've been dealing with have probably they're very personal, and so I can just imagine that it'd be like a very rich community experience.
Yeah, I've definitely discovered a sense of community just being in this class and working with Wallace's stuff. And I'll see people from our class on campus now, and we're waving our hands in the air and saying hello. And it's such a different relationship that we have with people in this class compared to relationships I've developed with people in other classes. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the human quality of Wallace's work. And it's just everything he's talking about is just very human, and we're able to all connect in our own ways on these issues. So it's been a really good experience that way.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a great final thought right there.
All right, we want to thank you guys for coming on. I want to give a special
thanks for having us.
Shout out and thank you to each one of you. Atticus, Derrek, Taylor, Emily, Alex, and Professor Josh, of course. We really appreciate you guys being on the show and coming on here and sharing your thoughts. When we post this on our website, we will link to your class website if it's ready, and your Twitter profiles if you want, or anything else from your class.
Syllabus, yeah.
We've had a great, hour like your typical class. It sounds like it runs over, so we've run over a little bit.
It would be so easy to keep talking for another hour or two as well.
If you want, we can have a supplemental class on Monday.
Yeah.
Episode 14.5.
That's
I love
awesome.
it.
Yeah, I got to ask, is anyone planning to come to the Wallace Conference in Illinois this summer, having now done this big long thing?
When is that? That's in July this year, right?
It's in late July.
Yeah, I don't think I'm not going to be able to make it this year, and we talked about it, but I don't think anybody.
That's too bad.
Anybody's going to, we're not going to be able to do it this year, but it'd be cool to do something next year to bring everybody back next year, and get together and kind of redo it again, and talk about the class again in that setting and meet everybody.
Cool. Like a class sort of reunion a year later, and then reflecting on the experience of the course and having had some distance from it. That'd be really interesting, I think.
Yeah, and I'm not sure logistically how we could do it, but it would be kind of cool.
Thank you guys so much again for coming on. We've had a blast talking to you.
Well, thanks again for having us. It was great.
I've really enjoyed it, and like I said, I could go for another whole class supplemental, no problem.
Yeah, we'll keep that in mind for sure. Awesome. So we'll post all those links and things in the show notes. Matt, where can people get in touch with us?
Well, before I give our contact info, I want to give a shout out to a couple of listeners who wrote in the last episode. And that's Paul Lopriato, John Henry, Alex Donnelly, Dean Jones, and Mark Bronner. And if you want to email us about anything in the past or the current or the present or the future, we are concavityshow@gmail.com. Or you can hit us on Twitter and Instagram @concavityshow. And our website is greatconcavity.podbean.com. But you can get our podcast from any podcasting app or iTunes store. So thanks to all of our listeners. We couldn't do it without you. We've really enjoyed this particular episode, and we will see you next time on the other side.
Mamacita.